Every year, thousands of hikers, campers, and fishermen disappear around the world. In the United States alone, around 3,000 people go missing every year in national parks and forests. Hey everyone, you're watching Evernight. Today, you'll hear real stories from Reddit users. Stories of people who went looking for peace and solitude, but found something very different from what they expected. Man in forest kills animals and chases after me while ringing bells. This is truly the scariest, most horrible thing that has ever happened to me. I have never been so petrified in my life. To this day, I still do not know who this man was, what he was trying to do, or if he still is where I saw him. I'm sorry for how long the geographical description is. I just want everyone to understand how secluded I was when this happened, and how badly it could have ended if it wasn't for my parents. I was back home for the summer for the first time in a year after starting uni. Our home was, still is, just outside of a small town with forests all around. There was also a small man-made lake, which was diverged from a river that ran for miles through the forest and ramified into a few streams east of the lake. Near my home, there was a small grassy path that led to the river following a stream. It was a long walk, but one I used to go on often as a child. I knew the forests there well. I knew where I could cut through dense trees to meet the stream. The walk I would go on always led me off the path, which turned northwest slowly, so away from the stream, and then took a sharp turn to the west after a few miles' walk, at which point the stream was hidden quite deep into the forest. I'd continue to walk north, and follow the stream through the forest to get to the river, then follow the river west to get to the lake. It's easy to get lost in this forest, because the terrain isn't just a slope down to the water, it goes up and down, and you end up completely surrounded by trees. I'd spent many days wandering around there, alone or with my dad, over the span of 18 years. Never saw anybody else in the forest. I went there twice that summer, both times alone-ish. The first time I left in the morning, I walked along the path, away from the stream to the sharp bend, then cut back into the forest. I reached the stream after an hour or so. As I was running my hands in the water, I heard a bell from far away, coming from the north. Something was making a bell ring fervently and periodically, which I found strange. I listened well, wondered if it was a lost hunting dog, and started moving towards the sound. Yeah, I bloody know I'd be the first person to die, but I was heading north anyway, so what the hell. I realized it couldn't have been an animal. I could tell the bell was too heavy because of how clear the sound was to be on a collar. I kept moving, and the bell was moving away from me. It stopped completely after 5 minutes. The stream wasn't big enough or strong enough to carry a bell. That could have been enclosed in a tin or something. And the river was too far still. I thought of everything, but nothing explained the sound, apart from one obvious thing, which I just didn't feel comfortable with for some reason. I knew it had to have been a person. I stopped thinking about it and just walked on normally. Until I found a badger. A bloomin' dead one, carefully decapitated. It had obviously been done with a knife. It was fairly fresh. The body was still limp, and there wasn't too much smell coming from it. The wound was full of maggots, but I knew that happened soon after exposure. The sound of the bell had been following the stream, so had I. So the badger was put there, maybe killed there, at least decapitated, while I was walking that way. I suppose. Dunno really. Nothing else happened that day. 1 week later, I went back for the second time that summer, and the last time ever. I left home at around 6 p.m. I made it to the stream, then walked to the river in an hour, then decided to go back the way I came because it was getting late and it was raining quite heavily. The sun set at around 9 p.m. I was walking as fast as I could. The sound of the rain in the trees was surreal and loud. I was somewhat trotting with my head down for a while through the clearest and most open part of the forest when I bumped into something heavy. The smell was sickly. It was the decomposing body of the badger, with his head strung to his front paws. That area looked a bit like a ham because of the way it was tied, just swinging from a tree, like an almost literal load of bollocks. It was this putrid bag of stench, wet and dripping green liquid. I started gagging. I had some sort of mucus-textured fluid in my hair. It was repulsive. At first, I just stared at it, slightly gobsmacked. Then I started fidgeting violently because I felt like I was drenched in its juices. I was soaking from the rain. My senses became confused. It felt like a bucket of ice-cold water had been thrown over me when I realized that I walked the same way to get to the river, so someone had strung up the body after I'd passed it on the way there. Someone knew I'd see it, so was someone watching me and running around the forest? Were the faint sounds of branches breaking around me not animals? I looked around and started jogging. I was half running, half walking away from the stream, back towards the path for a while, when I heard the bell again. I proceeded to call my dad while running. I told him to meet me on the path where it sharply turns west. It was the closest part of the path to me, to go as fast as he could and that someone was in the forest. I can't explain the feeling I had. It was like I just shed out my intestines and stomach. I literally felt the hairs on my neck raise despite being soaked. It was dark. I jogged as fast as I could. I was panicking because the path was still a bit far away, just too far to feel safe. It was still raining. Every single sound was muffled. I felt like everything was further away than ever before. The bell went on for way longer than the last time, on and off. I felt like it was surrounding me at one point. The fear combined with my compromised hearing and the fact that I couldn't flip and breathe properly was making me slightly lose my sense of direction. I was automatically heading southwest, but I wasn't really sure what I was even doing. I was breathing like a goddamn horse, coughing my lungs up, kind of crying out loud like a toddler does. Tripping over leaves and twigs like an idiot, I stayed on the phone with my mum, who was on her way with my dad. I kept hearing sounds, but I wasn't sure what they were. My mum was screaming on the phone at the same time that they were on the path, that I needed to run, that my dad had gotten out and was heading east from the path bend. I was terrified, so I went into survival mode. I was doing the half-running, half-speed-walking thing again because I was out of breath. Then I heard branches break, clear footsteps for the first time from down in the forest, and the bell ringing louder. I didn't want to, but I looked over my shoulder. That's when I saw what was in the forest with me. A tall figure creeping in my direction, at the very end of the clearing, ringing this bell. Slowly, in front of his stomach, I could tell he was staring straight at me. Now, I don't know if I had a hidden secret sprinting ability or instinctual adrenaline-induced superhuman powers, but when I tell you I ran for my life, I fucking didn't look back once. I screamed as much as I could. I lied. I'm on the phone with the police. They are on the path. Dad, I can see you. I'm here. I wanted to yell, Dad, please, where are you? But I kept that to myself. I felt like something awful was going to happen. I felt like the man was right behind me. I kept telling myself not to look back. I was gasping and wheezing, crying so hard and screaming for my dad. I felt shivers on my neck and then switched off. I just ran. I even dropped my bag and only realized I didn't have it anymore when I was in the car. I felt like my phone was my only way home. Things no longer felt real. It was like my legs were moving by themselves. I didn't know if the man was still following me. I could only hear my heart beating in my ears and the bell. I finally heard my dad shout my name, and I knew he was coming my way, and that he could see me because of the intonation of his voice. I pretty much lunged myself at him when we got to each other. My dad heard the bell too. My mom could hear it on the phone. She was waiting with the car ready to leave, fast. We went directly to the police station, and I got medical attention soon after. My dad burst into tears in the car, said he could hear the bell, and thought he wouldn't be able to see me. Asked what if I didn't have my phone? What if he hadn't picked up? They were almost as terrified as me because they witnessed everything through the call. They could hear me trying to run, and they could hear the danger. They just couldn't see it. The police couldn't really do much. They searched the area, and the only thing they found was a folded t-shirt placed under a rock. I didn't really question that at the time. And my bag was not recovered. They said it was probably some homeless man living in the forest, but failed to realize what could have happened if my dad didn't know that part of the forest like I did and where to find me. I'm not blaming anyone. The entire thing was my fault. There are just so many what-ifs. I want to believe it was just someone who decided to live in the woods and hunt or something. Maybe they were a bit mentally unstable, and they felt angry that I came into their territory. But what if it was more insidious? The way he moved towards me was abnormal. It was perverse because of how slowly he was ringing the bell. It's like he had me trapped. I didn't see any more detail. I just ran. To this day, I can't bloody go anywhere where I'll be alone. And the sound of bells is a real problem. The smell of moss as well. Anyway, my parents and Steve Jobs saved my life. So go hug yours now, and take decapitated badgers and bells as pagan signs that you're unwelcome. Stalked by a female solo camper on our mountain camping honeymoon. It was the summer of 2016, and I had just married my longtime girlfriend. Over the course of our 12-year relationship, we had traveled to the mountains several times in both summer and winter, for camping, but also to stay in nice mountain hotels and snowboard the slopes. Naturally, we both agreed this was how we wanted to spend the first few weeks of our marriage. We booked a 20-day stay at a mountainside campground on the other side of the country. We also decided to bring our dogs with us, as they too love being outdoors, and we generally bring them camping anyway. After 2 days of road tripping, we had arrived, quickly set up and settled in for a good long stay on the mountain. It was beautiful. A couple of days into our trip, and we had already met a bunch of fellow campers. We are very experienced campers, so we generally attract a lot of attention from novice campers, asking for tools or supplies as they see we are well set up. We are usually more than happy to help people get situated if they need matches, cream or sugar, or help setting up their equipment. It was day 4 or 5 when she first made her presence known to us. I will refer to this person as she or her, as we never learned her name. We were sitting down under the shade of the large pine tree at the edge of our site, drinking beers and playing cards, when she seemingly appeared out of nowhere. She was just suddenly right there. "Can I pet your dog?" she said. Even my dogs didn't see her approach, as the very sound of her voice triggered them into a startled frenzy. As the dogs were worked up already, I politely told her no. Then she just stood there, at the edge of our sight. Didn't say a word, just stood there sort of existing, but not really doing anything. She wasn't exactly staring at us or looking at anything in particular. I asked her if she needed anything, and she said no. After a few minutes, she walked off. I work with people with brain injuries, so I've had my fair share of experiences with unusual behaviors, including people with poor social skills. So I wasn't about to write this person off as creepy just yet, but she had my attention. I casually watched her walk off and enter a campsite across the path and a few sites down from ours. There was already a small tent set up in the site, but she proceeded to pull an even smaller, single-person tent from her backpack and began setting it up. The day prior, we saw 2 young girls set up the other tent and were clearly the occupants of the site. There was no further interaction with her that day, although we did notice that the owners of the other tent on the site were not around at all that day, and we didn't see them return that night. Well, the next morning I am walking to the camp showers to clean up for the day. As I walk past her site, I see she is sitting in her little tent reading a book. The door to the tent is open. I pay no attention and keep on my way to take my shower. When I'm done my shower and walking back, I notice her tent is now closed, but it's jiggling about, so I know someone is in there. Then she made her presence known in a big way. Just as I'm approaching her site on the way to mine, she unzips her tent, and I immediately see that she is completely nude. She then positions herself just inside the tent at the door and lets out this over-the-top full-body stretch and held her arms way up the sky while pushing her chest forward like it was some kind of mating ritual designed just for me. While she does this, she lets out what I only describe as an exotic moan. It was pretty obvious she was putting on a show for me. I continue on my way to my site and tell my wife about the display I had just been witness to. We both laughed it off and moved on with our plans to day hike a good trail to a waterfall. The trailhead for this hike was accessible from the campgrounds, so we didn't have to drive to get there. We just walked the additional 2 kilometers to the trail. We walked at a good pace, so when we got to the trail, we decided to stop for a few minutes and take some photos of the surrounding mountains before heading into the thicker bush. After sitting there for maybe 5 minutes, while my wife is taking pictures, she emerges from the trail that leads towards the campground. At first I thought, okay, coincidence. She's staying here and this is a pretty common trail. But then she sees that I see her, and she stops dead in her tracks and just stands there. Same demeanor as our first encounter. Just standing, not doing anything in particular, but also sending creep vibes our way. This was the first time I said to my wife, "I think we have a stalker." Confused, my wife then looks to where I'm looking and is immediately a little creeped out. Once again, I think, whatever, maybe she's just hiking the trail, no big deal. So we continue on the trail at a good pace, and she maintains a consistent distance behind us. Our dogs, at this point, are a little distracted by her, and our youngest dog keeps turning around to watch her. I got a little fed up with the dog constantly stopping to look back, so I decided we will stop for some water and let this woman pass. Well, what does she do but fucking stop walking when we stop, and once again just stands there. Okay, so now we are genuinely concerned, because this is approaching horror suspense movie creep level, and I start to wonder what this girl's intentions are. Standing motionless at that distance and refusing to pass us just ramped up the oh shit factor to about 9. So my wife and I agree to just give her and cut the hike short by taking the shorter loop, which was only another half-kilometer ahead, and head back to our camp. We managed to get some distance between us by jogging every time we would make a turn, and she was out of sight. We didn't see her again until later that night. That night, my wife decided to take an evening shower at the camp showers. When she returned to our camp, she tells me our stalker was in the bathrooms, also taking a shower. This time, however, she was with 2 other girls and appeared to be getting ready for a night at the club. There is a nearby ski town that has a few nightclubs and bars, so it was reasonable to see the girls getting ready for a night out. The 2 girls she was with were the 2 we saw previously set up at her site. My wife explains that she quickly picked up on the fact that the 2 girls and our stalker friend were not well known to each other. It was clear that the 2 girls were close friends with plans to go out partying, and our stalker was making an attempt to be friends and sort of invited herself to join them in their night out. Now we know the ski town well, and the girls kept reinforcing that they were meeting at a specific restaurant before going to the bar. It was currently 10:30 p.m., and we know the restaurant they were telling her to go to was closed at 10 p.m. They were lying to her about their plans. The stalker kept asking them too, "Are you sure this place? Are you sure?" They convinced her, and she then left to her tent to finish getting ready, while the 2 friends stayed in the bathroom to finish their makeup. My wife went on to explain how after she left, the 2 friends were mocking and making fun of our stalker. They were young 20-somethings acting like little girls in elementary school. My wife has no time for that. Creepy stalker or not, she had to say something to the girls for their behavior. My wife calls them out on their behavior. Well, putting all the catty bitch bullying aside, the girls explained to my wife that the stalker girl had set up her tent on their site when they were staying with a friend in the ski town. When they returned, they found her living at their site without invitation. She had just taken it upon herself to take a little corner of their site without knowing them at all. The girls said they were upset with her and trying to make her feel uncomfortable so she would leave, but she wouldn't leave. Of course, my wife asked them why they didn't just report her to the park warden. The excuse they gave was they were leaving the next day and didn't want to make a huge deal out of it. So whatever happened between them and the fake late dinner plans and clubbing is unknown to us. About 3 a.m. that same night, we are all awoken to a blood-curdling scream right outside our camper. At first I was like, holy shit, that must be a wild animal. My wife is trembling, dogs barking, and I am startled but curious. I peel back the window cover to see her, standing motionless on the path outside our trailer. I had the window cover down maybe 8 to 10 centimeters when she appears to make direct eye contact with me. My heart rate is jacked. What the actual fuck? After gazing in my general direction for what seemed like an eternity, she calmly turns around and walks to her tent. I go make sure our trailer is locked. After a good hour and a stiff whiskey, we manage to get back to sleep. So the next day is a Friday. We have friends from a nearby major city coming up the mountains to spend the weekend with us. We haven't seen them in a while, so we are excited for a couple days together. Well, they are not at our site for 15 minutes, and as they are setting up their tent, she mysteriously appears out of nowhere yet again. Like, bam, there she is. But now this time, she is actually in our site. I hadn't had a chance to tell our friends about her before she arrived, so they were a little more friendly than I was. She asks me once again if she can pet my dog, who during all of this is barking at her. I think I said something like, "She isn't being very friendly towards you right now, so I would prefer if you didn't." She didn't pet my dog, but she also just stood there, staring at me, like she was considering how she would dismember my limbs. She then notices our friend's tent brand as he is still setting it up, and comments on how it's the same model as hers, although a larger sleeping capacity. My buddy has picked up on the creep vibes and my general displeasure with her presence, so just gives her the, "Oh yeah, cool," and keeps setting it up. Well, she starts grabbing at the tent pegs and picks up the hammer and says she will help him set it up because she has experience with it. My buddy declines and asks for his tools back. Cue the fucking psychopath stare down. But this time she has a hammer in hand, adding to the "oh shit" factor. She literally just drops everything right there and runs off. I go on to explain the last few days to our friends, and they agree we need to keep an eye on her. So by this time, the two girlfriends whose site she had hijacked were packed up and gone. It's now Friday night, and we've been drinking all day, so we're feeling pretty good. It's maybe about 11 p.m. when she walks over to our site again. She says, "Hey, you guys seem to have a lot of extra room with the tent and the camper. Do you think I could stay with you guys tonight? We could have a lot of fun in there together." My buddy is feeling pretty good from all the day beers, so he's pretty forward when he replies, "Did you just propose a gangbang to us?" Now this whole time, I'm just sitting in my camp chair with my whiskey, taking this all in. She wasn't really taking notice to me at all so far. Then she smiles, turns her head and looks directly down at me and says, "I like your friend." She then turns around and walks away into the darkness of the night towards the forest. What the fuck? We are all now terrified she is going to return. I decided right then and there, if we see her again in a creepy fashion, I am calling the park warden. This is getting silly. Well, the night is winding down, so we all decide to walk together to the bathrooms to clean up for bed. My wife pulls on my hoodie and says, "Babe, look." I look over to see that the site she was set up on is completely destroyed. Shit everywhere. Just stuff, garbage, clothing, food, everywhere. I thought, okay, this is weird. Could this have been a bear? No, we would have heard it. I then noticed that the tent is gone. She is gone and left the site a complete mess. As luck would have it, the park patrol was completing their fire rounds and were at the messed up site when we were returning from the bathrooms. We told them there was a girl staying on her who was acting erratic, and we suspected she was squatting on the site, based on our conversation with the two girls from earlier in the week. We didn't see her again for the rest of our trip, until the last full day. There is a great little lookout point not far from our site, which has amazing views of the river and valley below, and it was a perfect evening to see the sunset behind the mountains. It was a lovely final send-off to an otherwise beautiful honeymoon. Just when we thought we were done with her, she emerged once again from seemingly nowhere. We were sitting on a couple chairs that are bolted in place at the viewpoint, taking pictures of the valley below. As my wife is looking through the camera viewfinder, she picks up on the woman in the distance. She is standing there in the woods a little ways down mountain towards the valley, watching us. As her final act, she walked up the mountainside and sat right beside us on a boulder that was beside the chairs. She says nothing, just sits there. My wife has the brilliant idea of asking me to take one last picture of the scenery, and she gives me a little wink. I pick up on her idea right away, and I position myself so this woman is going to be in the picture. My wife wanted this lady's photo in the event something bad happens with her before we can leave the area. We took our final looks out at the beautiful scenery and headed to our camp for the night. We didn't see or hear from her again. Upon reflection, we agreed this woman had some serious mental health issues, obviously. She had zero social skills, and we did witness her attempt to make friends with those two girls that shafted her in a terrible way. That being said, she did things way beyond the realm of acceptable social awkwardness. There were moments I thought she would pull out a knife and kill us all where we stood. More than that, the stalking, The midnight screaming and running off into the woods at night was terrifying to us, and I feel a story worthy of this sub. I do have the photo on a thumb drive somewhere, and we'll see about uploading a pixelated photo if it's appropriate. To anyone else, the picture just looks like a person is sitting in the shot, but to us, it's a reminder of our wild adventure and start of our amazing marriage. To our honeymoon stalker, let's not meet ever again. A creepy guy lurking around the woods. This happened about 5 years ago now. I had just gone through a rough breakup of a codependent relationship, so I was going through a phase of trying to be more independent, self-sufficient, and just generally more okay with being alone. I would go to a lot of movies, restaurants, etc. by myself. At the time I was living in Montana, where spending time outdoors is prime recreation. Camping solo seemed like it would be a good exercise in truly being self-reliant, so I packed a little tent and went to Jerry Johnson Hot Springs. Jerry Johnson is a natural hot springs with a few small, mostly natural pools in the mountains on the border of Montana and Idaho. I'm trying to keep this as brief as possible, so I won't go on explaining the place. You can check the link if you want to see it for yourself. What I will say is that it's truly in the middle of nowhere. From the interstate, it's about a 1-3 mile hike across a bridge and into the woods. And from the interstate, it's about a 45-minute drive in either direction before you reach any kind of civilization in the form of a gas station. There isn't a motel or anything attached to the hot springs like there are with some. It's just forest land with a few tiny ponds of warm water, and if you ever go, you'll probably be the only person there. There's plenty of daylight, so I decide I'll go soak first and then set up my camp when I'm finished. I make the short hike to find there is a couple, man and woman about 30-ish, in the main pool, and they look very startled at the sight of me. I say a friendly hello from a distance as I approach. At first they don't respond, just stare. Then the guy pipes up. "What are you doing, man?" I tell him that I'm confused. The man then asks, "Is that you that's been creeping around the woods watching us for the last hour?" I assured them that I didn't know what they were talking about, and they begin to tell me that there's someone in the woods, way off of the trail. Apparently they've been yelling at him, and he just doesn't respond. He'll walk away into the woods for a while and reappear somewhere else, just watching. After they've been assured that it isn't me, I get undressed and get into the water. Their pupils are huge. They probably ate some magic mushrooms. I never asked, but it just seems pretty obvious. It's not a big deal. It's basically the perfect setting for it, but it makes me think they might just be having a bad trip. We talk for a while, first about the creepy guy and then about some other stuff. The mood lightens and they seem relieved not to be alone. I'm a relatively large guy, and I guess there is strength in numbers. No more sightings of the creeper. They get out before me. I'm in the pool by myself for about 10 minutes before I hear shouting in the woods. I decide to cut my soak short, just in case someone is in trouble. I get out, dry off quickly, and get dressed, still mostly wet, when I hear another shout. I start quickly hiking. I eventually come across the couple shouting off into the woods, saying things like, "We have a gun," which they didn't. I ask what's going on, and they say the guy was just ominously standing in the path, looking at them, way off in the distance. When they started to shout at him, he left the path and again retreated into the woods. Now he's out of sight. Through all of this, they never get a good look at him. We walk back to our cars. We decide that we'll camp near each other. There's an official campground, but you have to pay. The guy tells me he knows another spot that's relatively flat that would work. I agree and follow them. It's not very far. They set up their tent and I set up mine about 100 yards away. I wanted to give them plenty of space to trip or whatever, and I was out there in the first place to camp alone. We were in a dry season on raw forest floor, so neither of us made a campfire. I got all set up and just sat around reading a book and enjoying nature. The mosquitoes made me retreat into my tent at about 6 p.m., and by 9 I was asleep. At about midnight, I was awoken by the sound of screaming. I grabbed my flashlight and .22 pistol, put on my shoes but didn't tie them, and started running toward the other tent. When I arrived, the two were standing outside of the tent with their own flashlights, completely losing it. They said the guy had been there and that we all needed to get the hell out of there. They showed me a slice in the wall of their tent that he had made with a knife. They haphazardly packed their stuff in a hurry, and we walked back to the cars. I only then realized that I hadn't grabbed any of my own stuff. I asked if they would go back with me to get it, and they basically said, "Sorry dude, you're on your own," got in their car, and left. I thought about it for a minute. I could come back the next day and get my stuff, but it was over an hour drive in each direction, and I was there now. I did have a gun, but if I shot someone in the woods, even in self-defense, that would be the begging of another nightmare that could last the rest of my life. I decided I would go back for my stuff. I killed my flashlight and basically went stealth ninja mode back into the trees surrounding the clearing where my tent was. My thought was that if I was really quiet, then I could hear him, but he couldn't hear me. It took me about 20 minutes to get to where my tent was, since I was moving so slowly. When I got back to my tent, it was untouched. I quickly threw on my backpack, put my flashlight in my mouth, grabbed my tent in its fully assembled state with my sleeping bag still inside, and ran back to the car, with a loaded .22 revolver in my hand, stabilizing the awkward tent being held sort of on my shoulders, head back. I got back to my car, started it, and drove away. What didn't really occur to me until later is that I never actually saw this guy. And to this day, I can't be sure that there was actually anyone in the woods. I kind of doubt that these people would have sliced their own tent. But at the same time, I kind of doubt that there was actually just a dude hanging out in the wilderness all day and night just to freak these campers out. It's possible that the two campers were just messing with me, but if so, they deserve Oscars for their acting performance, as they seemed genuinely terrified. I was hunted in the woods at night. Years ago, when I was still a teenager, my friend Justin and I would often go longboarding at night, as my friends and I were quite the night owls. We loved the freedom of almost never seeing another soul on the roads or the paths we frequented. Even when using main roads, it would be very rare to see a car out so late in such a rural area, and you could see and hear them coming from very far away due to their headlights and the noise of the vehicle, disrupting the peaceful silence of the night. We were really into it at the time, and would often ride our boards for miles and miles, sometimes not arriving home until the sun was up. One particular night, we decided to ride a few miles away from our usual back roads to take one of our favorite hidden routes. It began with a narrow, paved path that was the only piece of land separating two sides of a long lake. It would often sink under due to rain, and we wanted to seize the opportunity to use it before it rained and went underwater again. It was roughly 2 miles long and was extremely relaxing to ride through due to the scenery. After making it to the end of the lake, we decided to continue moving and turn into a very close path that leads directly into a densely wooded wilderness preservation. As we came up to the first hill, we looked down at the bottom into the blackness. We both noticed what appeared to be a tiny, moving ball of dim light down there. It moved so strangely, and it was extremely difficult to make out what it was. Rather than shine our flashlight down, we curiously watched it for a few moments, whispering to each other about what it could possibly be. All at once, that small light turned into multiple blinding lights and extremely loud revving sounds, overwhelming our senses that had become accustomed to the dark and silence. Acting purely on fear, we instantly turned around and ran as fast as we could, hearing yelling and revving gaining behind us. By sheer luck, we managed to run off-path into a very dark, very overgrown hole in the side of a hill overlooking where we had just come from. We decided to hide in the natural dugout of this hill, hoping the plants and darkness would be enough to protect us from whatever was happening out there. We watched our pursuers ride up to where we had originally been standing. There were 4 men, 2 on 4-wheelers and 2 on full-sized motorcycles. They were yelling at each other about something, but we couldn't make out what they were saying due to the distance we had covered. We felt safe enough to whisper very softly to each other, and speculated who these people could be. Our first thought was they might be park rangers of some kind, although we had never seen one here in the many times we had been through, and honestly, we doubted that this county had the budget or even the desire to have anyone patrol the deep woods at night. Besides that, these men were on vehicles entirely inappropriate for the paved bike trails, and they were very angry about something. They called out to us for a while, yelling things like, "We know you're out there," and "We can see you, come on out." We stayed silent and decided to call their bluff instead of running. Eventually, we clearly heard one of the men yell, "Find them now!" and smash a bottle. That had erased any hope we had that these were just park rangers. We watched them split up, each of them going a different way down the series of paths on their vehicles, including the path we came from. It took us what felt like ages to even move. We were frozen in terror inside that dugout, watching the lights from the vehicles travel through the woods and paths, one of them already coming full circle and passing the point he started from. I thought about calling for help, but I was too afraid to open my phone, in fear that even the smallest amount of light would give away our location. After waiting for the lights of the vehicles to reach their farthest distance yet, we finally summoned the nerve to get up and try to run somewhere far enough from these people to safely make a call. We ran as hard and fast as we could through the woods. Since their headlights gave away their location on these paths, we would hide again whenever we felt they were getting too close. Our available hiding spots were getting progressively worse as the woods became less dense, and the fear I felt waiting for one of them to drive past us while basically only being covered in leaves and plants may still be unmatched to this day. Finally, we emerged from the woods onto the intersection of 2 main roads far from where we started. We ducked down into the ditch to call for help. When I opened my phone, I noticed I had recent missed calls from one of our other friends, Connor, who we were supposed to meet up with after our longboard excursion. I called him and frantically asked where he was. Luck was with us again. He hadn't given up on our plans, despite us ignoring him, and was only a few miles away, already heading in our direction. I gave him the names of the 2 streets we were near the corner of, and explained that we needed picked up right away. He agreed to speed over to us while Justin and I waited in hiding. Thankfully, Connor arrived before any of those men did. We bolted into the back seats of his car, yelling for him to get out of there, and he took off. Relief doesn't begin to describe what I felt, being safely driven home after everything I had just experienced. After explaining everything that happened to Connor, we ended up just moving on with our night and decided not to call the police. We figured they would be gone by the time any officer made it out there, and that we would only be putting ourselves at risk by admitting to breaking the law by taking those paths so late at night. I still have no idea what happened, or who those people were. I've been told all kinds of theories from friends and family that have heard this story. Some think we walked right up to a huge drug deal. Justin and I later admitted to each other that when the revving started and we couldn't see, our minds both went straight to chainsaw-wielding horror movie serial killer, so I suppose it could have been much worse. Frustratingly enough, whatever those men thought we saw that made them want to catch us so badly, we never actually saw. We'll never really know, I suppose. The night the woods stood silent. Years ago, man, I am old, but let's say mid-1990s, I worked as a woodland firefighter while in the Army Reserves. I worked as a spotter. Basically, I was stationed in a giant fire tower in the middle of a national park. My job was just as it sounds. I would use binoculars and look out for fire, smoke, other telltale signs of fire. My nearest compadre was 5 miles or so from me. My days consisted of working my shift, taking long walks around the fire tower, being on the lookout for anyone who might be having illegal fires, looking out for wildlife, and staying afoot of bears and wolves. The way our shifts worked back then was 1 week on, 1 week off, so we slept in the towers, cooked our food, etc. There were nearby toilets and showers for our. One day I came across an illegal bear trap. I had several ranger friends, and I safely set off the trap, then picked it up to take to the ranger station on one of my treks out for food in my Jeep. Poaching is illegal in the park, and carried a big fine even back then, and some jail time. But it did not stop the poachers from trying. I heard rifle shots and headed back for my fire tower. We did have a rifle in the tower, to be used in cases of emergencies. Just a few months back, a fellow spotter had been mauled to death by a grizzly, so each tower had been outfitted with a rifle. I looked with my binoculars, but did not see anything out of the ordinary. I radioed my coworker, Ben, an older guy, in the adjacent tower. He hadn't heard anything today, but had came across a few traps himself. That night, after a dinner of frank and beans and toast, I was writing to my future wife when I heard the rumbling of a truck. Thinking it may be Ben, occasionally he made the trek over. We would crack open a soda and chew the fat for a bit. Instead, I saw 4 men with riffles get out of the truck. One looked around and leaned up against the truck, while the other 3 grabbed traps and began to set them up. I grabbed the rifle and my lantern and headed down the stairs. I was only 21, a farmer's son from a rural Virginia farming town, and even with 1 deployment behind me, I was naive. I should have called it in to the Rangers, but instead I thought I could talk some sense into 4 dangerous men. I barely got a, "Hey, what are you doing?" out of my mouth before I was roughly shoved by rough hands. My lantern fell, and I heard it crack. The rifle was kicked away from me, and I felt the breath leave my chest when I was violently kicked in the stomach. I barely had caught my breath when I was grabbed by 2 of the men and was shoved forward into the woods. It seemed like we walked for miles, but in reality it was probably only a mile. However, I noticed that there were no sounds. In the forest, it is rarely silent. It's a cacophony of sounds, even at night. Owls, the wolves, crickets. But on this night, nothing. Suddenly, I was shoved onto my knees, and I felt hot tears well up. I thought of my parents, my little sister and brother, and my fiancé who were back home in Virginia. I heard the rack of a gun, and I shut my eyes and prayed. Suddenly, the night erupted. However, it was the sounds of sirens, those of the forest rangers, and behind them in his pickup, Ben, who had tried to radio me that he had heard a car's engine and came to my tower when I didn't reply. The poachers were arrested. Ben drove me back to the tower. I was still shaking. He didn't lay into me for not following procedure, just said, "That was close, kid." I ended up leaving the job months later to take a job closer to home, but I never ran into any more poachers during the rest of my time. I kept in contact with Ben for a while, sent him a wedding invite and then a photo of my firstborn son in 1997. However, as time usually does, we lost track of one another, and a few years back I Googled him. He would have been 75 or so, to discover he passed away a few years back. Don't know whatever came of those poachers, but I know I never want to meet them again. A strange man hunted me through a national park. I posted this story in a thread on a Nature Pics subreddit and was told I should post it somewhere like this. I was camping in the middle of nowhere in Washington, near Mount Rainier. Like, not an official campground, just way out in the forest where I wouldn't have expected another human for miles. One night I wake up and hear something, open my tent, and there is a guy sitting by where my fire had been, right outside my tent. Nothing particularly noteworthy about the guy, just a fairly regular-looking dude just sitting there a couple feet from my tent. No bag or pack or anything with him, just a guy. He saw me open the tent. His eyes got huge like he had just seen a ghost, and he took off. It shook me up pretty badly, but over the next day, I managed to put it out of my mind fairly well, after writing it off as just some odd occurrence and a guy that was probably high or something, and had somehow managed to set up a camp coincidentally not far from mine. Then, 2 days after that, and 10 to 15 miles away, in totally random directions that nobody could take the same path as on accident, I was sitting by the fire that night and started hearing noises that I got more and more convinced were a person. I called out to them, and out of the darkness, someone was like, "Do you know how to get to Bell's Canyon?" I said, "No. I don't even think that's a real place there." They kept talking from just out of my line of vision. I tried to see them with my flashlight, but they yelled, "Aim that away." And, kind of spooked and not wanting to piss off a potentially crazy person, I did. After like 15 minutes of me being very freaked out and them talking and asking completely random questions from the darkness, it sounded like the voice had gotten closer, so I shined my light that way again, and it was the same dude who had been outside my tent 2 nights before. He had to have followed me almost 15 miles over 2 days, because there is no way he could have just accidentally wound up in the same spot, as vast as that wilderness is. No possible way. As soon as my light hit him, he took off again. I started to chase him, but didn't want to get lost in the wilderness in the dark, so stopped quickly, after probably only 100 to 200 feet. This one couldn't be written off, because the only way he could have been in both places is specifically if he was following me. I decided the trip was very over first thing in the morning, and hiked back out over 3 days, constantly doubling back, trying to throw anyone following off my trail, and occasionally hiding and waiting to see if he would come by following me. I really can't describe how terrifying it was to feel like I was being hunted through the woods, and to actually have to brainstorm on things I could do to best avoid potentially being murdered. On the first night of hiking out, twice I heard what sounded like a person walking circles outside my tent, but by the time I mustered the courage to look, nobody was there. On the second night, I heard what I thought was an animal, making noises at first in the distance, but slowly decided sounded more like a human making animal calls, but could have actually been an animal. But I didn't actually see the guy again. But it really sounded like a person making howling noises. I literally almost cried when I finally got back to my car. The relief was so strong. To this day, probably the most terrifying experience I've ever had. I have no idea who the guy was or what his intentions were, and no way of getting an explanation, but I really can't articulate just what a terrifying few days it was. That's all for today. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Also, let me know in the comments which story you liked the most. See you next time.